people of the sun, and we are people of the sun. And if you don't know it, and I can't see how you wouldn't, if you are a person of the sun, then you obviously have darkened skin, because that's what the sun does when you're exposed to it. It darkens your skin. So I'm going to start addressing black people as people of the sun, or even brown people as people of the sun. So let me start again. To my American people of the sun and others. I'm making this video and showing you the actual news conference that was given by Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, undercover Klan member, in my opinion, regarding the rescission of DACA. Now, DACA was created through executive order. So in my opinion, the person who should have been giving this news conference was President Trump, since it was his decision to rescind the executive order. Now, true, anyone could have given this news conference. You know, the kid around the corner could have been handed a speech, and if he could read it, did exactly what Jefferson Beauregard Sessions did. But it was Mr. Trump and his lackeys who made the decision to rescind the DACA Act, as it's called. Now, the funny thing about it is, after all this went down, about 4 hours later, Donald Trump appears to have walked back his rescission, or at least stated the possibility of walking it back by tweeting out that he would review it in 6 months if Congress hasn't acted. So you can bet your bottom dollar that he's going to have to review this. And 6 months from now, I guess we'll have to wait and see exactly how it goes down. But I'm going to play the entire clip from Mr. Sessions' speech, you can call it, or press conference. And I want to point out the fallacies and the direct contradictions in what he's saying versus what this administration is actually doing. Here we go.
Good morning. I'm here today to announce that the program known as DACA that was effectuated under the Obama administration is being rescinded. The DACA program was implemented in 2012 and essentially provided a legal status for recipients for a renewable 2-year term, work authorization, and other benefits, including participation in the Social Security program, to 800,000 mostly adult illegal aliens. The policy was implemented unilaterally to great controversy and legal concern after Congress rejected legislative proposals to extend similar benefits on numerous occasions to this same group of illegal aliens. In other words, the executive branch, through DACA, deliberately sought to achieve what the legislative branch specifically refused to authorize on multiple occasions. Such an open-ended circumvention of immigration laws was an unconstitutional exercise of authority by the executive branch. The effect of this unilateral executive amnesty, among other things, contributed to a surge of minors at the southern border that yielded terrible humanitarian consequences. It also denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same illegal aliens to take those jobs. We inherited from our founders and have advanced an unsurpassed legal heritage, which is the foundation of our freedom, our safety, and our prosperity. As Attorney General, it is my duty to ensure that the laws of the United States are enforced and that the constitutional order is upheld. No greater good for the overall health and well-being of our republic than preserving and strengthening the impartial rule of law. Societies where the rule of law is treasured are societies that tend to flourish and succeed. Societies where the rule of law is subject to political whims and personal biases tend to become societies afflicted by corruption, poverty, and human suffering. To have a lawful system of immigration that serves the national interest, we cannot admit everyone who would like to come here. It's just that simple. That would be an open borders policy, and the American people have rightly rejected that. Therefore, the nation must set and enforce a limit on how many immigrants we admit each year, and that means all cannot be accepted. This does not mean they are bad people or that our nation disrespects or demeans them in any way. It means we are properly enforcing our laws as Congress has passed them. It is with these principles and duties in mind, and in light of imminent litigation, that we reviewed the Obama administration's DACA policy. Our collective wisdom is that the policy is vulnerable to the same legal and constitutional challenges that the courts recognize with respect to the DACA program, which was enjoined on a nationwide basis in a decision that was affirmed by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Fifth Circuit specifically concluded that DACA had not been implemented in a fashion that allows sufficient discretion and that DACA was foreclosed by Congress's careful plan, close quote. In other words, the immigration law that Congress passed foreclosed this possibility of DACA. In other words, it was inconsistent with the Constitution's separation of powers. That decision was affirmed by the Supreme Court on an equally undivided basis. If we were to keep the Obama administration's executive amnesty policy, the likeliest outcome is that it would too be enjoined just as was DACA. The Department of Justice has advised the President and the Department of Homeland Security that the Department of Homeland Security should begin an orderly, lawful wind down, including the cancellation of the memo that authorized this program. Acting Secretary Duke has chosen appropriately to initiate a wind down process. This will enable the Department of Homeland Security to conduct an orderly change and fulfill the desire of this administration to create a time period for Congress to act should it so choose. We firmly believe this is the responsible path. Simply put, if we are to further our goal of strengthening the constitutional order and the rule of law in America, the Department of Justice cannot defend this overreach. George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley, in testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, was clear about the enormous constitutional infirmities raised by this action. He said, quote, in his testimony, "In ordering this blanket exception, President Obama was nullifying part of a law that he simply disagreed with. If a president can claim sweeping discretion to suspend key federal laws, the entire legislative process becomes little more than a pretense. The circumvention of the legislative process not only undermines the authority of this branch," he's referring to the legislative branch, "but destabilizes the tripartite system as a whole." So this is not a little matter. Ending the previous administration's disrespect for the legislative process is an important first step. All immigration policies should serve the interests of the people of the United States, lawful immigrant and native-born alike. Congress should carefully and thoughtfully pursue the types of reforms that are right for the American people. Our nation is comprised of good and decent people who want their government leaders to fulfill their promises and advance an immigration policy that serves the national interest. We are people of compassion, and we are people of law. But there is nothing compassionate about the failure to enforce immigration laws. Enforcing the law saves lives, protects communities and taxpayers, and prevents human suffering. Failure to enforce the laws in the past has put our nation at risk of crime, violence, and terrorism. The compassionate thing to do is end the lawlessness, enforce our laws, and if Congress chooses to make changes to those laws, to do so through the process set forth by our founders in a way that advances the interests of the American people. That is what the President has promised to do and has delivered to the American people. Under President Trump's leadership, this administration has made great progress in the last few months toward establishing a lawful and constitutional immigration system. This makes us safer and more secure. It will further, economically, the lives of millions who are struggling, and it will enable our country to more effectively teach new immigrants about our system of government and to assimilate them to the cultural understandings that support it. The substantial progress in reducing illegal immigration at our border seen in recent months is almost entirely due to the leadership of President Trump and his inspired immigration officers. But the problem is not yet solved, and without more action, we could see illegality rise again rather than be eliminated. As a candidate and now in office, President Trump has offered specific ideas and legislative solutions that will protect American workers, increase wages and salaries, defend the national security, ensure the public safety, and increase the general well-being of the American people. He has worked closely with many members of Congress, including in the introduction of the RAISE Act, which would produce enormous benefits for our country. And this is how our democratic process works. There are many powerful interest groups in the country, and every one of them has a constitutional right to advocate their views and represent whomever they choose. But the Department of Justice does not represent any narrow interest or any subset of the American people. We represent all of the American people and protect the integrity of our Constitution. That is our charge. We at the Department of Justice are proud and honored to work to advance this vision for America and to do our best each day to ensure the safety and security of the American people. Thank you very much.
Will you use the personal information?
All right. A question was yelled out at him, which he didn't answer. So let me basically unpack a bunch of the stuff that he basically said or lied about. First and foremost, he mentioned multiple times, supporting the rule of law. And if we allow personal bias and whims to affect how we support the rule of law, it will create untold suffering for the American people. Well, funny thing about it is, President Trump pardoned Joe Arpaio, who was violating and was convicted of violating the rule of law when he was targeting people who appeared to be of Hispanic descent, but not just them, but also other people of the sun, i.e. African Americans, in his particular jurisdiction. He was found guilty of his crime, and before he could even be sentenced, President Trump, through his own personal bias for his friend, on a whim, if you can call it that, basically thumbed his nose at the rule of law by pardoning Mr. Arpaio. So for Jefferson Beauregard Sessions to get up there and start talking about support for the rule of law rings pretty hollow as far as I'm concerned. Now again, he shouldn't have even been there. Mr. Trump should have been the one delivering this particular news, since it was the rescission of an executive order by the president's office that has resulted in this policy going forward, and he is the one who rescinded the order. He should have been the one delivering the news. And from Thursday on, it was indicated that the White House would make a decision. So if they made the decision, then they should have delivered the news. That's one. Now, it is true that President Obama did act, but he acted because the legislature refused to act. And they did so. Why? Number one, immigration obviously is a very touchy subject. But number two, when President Obama decided to give relief to the DACA individuals, it basically incensed John Boehner and the Republicans, specifically the Tea Party people, and they stated that they would do nothing whatsoever because he had taken the action, instead of going the other way by saying, okay, we're going to handle this, formulated and passed laws to take care of the situation, which would have allowed President Obama to rescind his own executive order. But they had so much hate for President Obama and everything that he did that they basically decided to take their ball and go home. So that's why we have DACA today. Now, Mr. Sessions spoke about jobs being denied to Americans, and that basically is untrue, okay? The DACA individuals who acquired employment, and 96% of them are either in school or gainfully employed either by someone else or within their own businesses, they basically were just more qualified, better trained or better educated, so they basically were entitled to getting the jobs that they obtained. Now, we're always told by the right that we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Well, these people coming in did pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they basically benefited from their own efforts. You have approximately, I want to say, about 40 or 50,000 DACA kids that are graduating from high school every year, and you have another approximately 10,000 or so DACA kids who are graduating college every year. I call that pulling myself up by my bootstrap if I'm one of those people. Now, again, the American people, by a 70-30 margin, support the principles of DACA, but apparently these guys have cotton in their ears and blinders over their eyes because they are not performing the will of the American people. Now, the previous Department of Justice was more than happy to defend DACA, but this Justice Department wasn't, and that's specifically because of the gentleman you see in front of you, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions. You know, I don't know if it was just me, but it looks like this guy was salivating when he came up there, and certain times during his dissertation of his speech, it looked like his eyes lit up and Christmas had come early. But, you know, again, that's just me. Let me say this. DACA does serve to the benefit of America. Individuals who have protection under DACA are documented to be much more lawful than the average American citizen, and they are a net positive as far as contributions to the American economy. If you weren't aware of it, every 2 years they have to pay $500 in order to renew their DACA permissions. 800,000 people, billions of dollars that go into the American economy with no material benefit other than the ability to reside in this country. In my mind, that's found money. Now, Mr. Sessions was talking about compassion, but he had yet to explain where the compassion was for the 800,000 people that the rescission has affected. That rescission is going to place people in jeopardy, okay? Those 800,000 people are probably going to be subject to higher crime perpetrated against them because of their more than likely unwillingness to want to deal with law enforcement in supporting, in reporting crime. A bunch of them are going to come out of the labor force, which is going to reduce our economic growth, which is going to create labor shortages. So I want to see where all of those people are that are going to fill those jobs that these DACA individuals are going to have to vacate. In my mind, that's going to cause a contraction in business, not an expansion of business, not an expansion of employment, and not an expansion of wages. He mentioned that the failure to enforce our laws have put the country at risk of terrorism, crime, and etc. But he has nothing to back that up. The laws that needed to be enforced in order to stop those things have remained in force. Not enforcing the laws, and I want to know which laws specifically he's talking about, did not create any of the terrorist acts that have been perpetrated in this country. And if you want to take that a step further, let's talk about Dylan Roof. That guy was a terrorist, and what laws were not enforced that allowed him to do what he did? And he's just one example. Now, if you want to talk about the police state and the fact that the police break the laws all the time, they kill people of the sun indiscriminately, and for the most part, if they make it to trial and never convicted, it would be nice if the laws were enforced in those instances and juries decided to do the right thing instead of giving more than the benefit of the doubt to bullshit excuses given by police officers. Compassion would have truly been to help the DACA recipients, but being the person that both he and Mr. Trump are, persons I should say, that he and Mr. Trump are, compassion had nothing to do with it. This was a strictly political move in order to satisfy Donald Trump's base that was getting antsy because unfortunately they weren't tired of winning because they hadn't won anything yet. So he had to get a win somewhere, and this was the easiest place for him to get it. Donald Trump has done nothing to further immigration policy. So what Mr. Sessions said was an absolute lie. This action will not further America economically. It will not increase wages. All that it's going to do is create an underground class of people, potentially, and underground markets both for labor and other things. That money is not going to flow into the economy and have as great an effect as legal employment would have, specifically in the payment of income taxes, Social Security taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions was more than happy to praise the asshole that was all over him. So in my opinion, he's just a self-serving twerp, who's lapping, at the heels of his master, Donald Trump. And when Donald Trump patted him on the head and gave him this bone as far as DACA was concerned, as far as it looks like to me, I guess all is forgiven and everything is right in the Jefferson Beauregard Sessions household and relationship between himself and Donald Trump. Now, he stated that it is in Congress's purview to get this thing fixed, and the president is working with members of Congress. That's a bunch of bullshit. Donald Trump is fighting with Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, and he's also fighting with Mitch McConnell, who is the majority leader in the Senate. Okay, so if he can't get along with those two guys, and there's plenty of documentation stating that he and McConnell are almost in a pitched battle, that means nothing is going to be done. Now, the Justice Department is supposed to represent all of the people, but in my particular opinion, it looks like they're representing a small majority of the people, of which you have your white supremacists and your racists making up a decent, if not majority share of that representation. Now, he talked about Donald Trump keeping his promise to the American people. Well, Donald Trump did promise the DACA individuals that they could rest easy. But I don't know about you folks, but based on what's going down right now, I can't think of a single reason why a DACA recipient should be resting easy at this point. They basically now have targets on their backs with timers, and approximately 6 months from now, those timers are going to go off, and it's going to be open season. And then given the fact that they have all of the information on the 800 DACA recipients, it's going to be like shooting fish in a barrel for them to pick all of these people up. Now, a notice was issued by the Department of Homeland Security today after this particular speech that any DACA individual should begin to make preparations to leave the country. So you tell me what that's all about. There are a lot of people that are jumping up and down about how great this is. And in particular, the Heritage Foundation has certain individuals that are employed by them that are basically racist and have written racist literature stating that Hispanic people are racially inferior, mentally inferior to Caucasians. Number one, that's not true. But number two, where have we heard that one before? Oh yeah, people of the sun were supposed to be racially inferior, both emotionally and also intellectually to people of the cave. But we know that that is absolutely and unequivocally not true. Now, Mr. Sessions, if he was so gung-ho regarding this policy, should have stayed to take questions. But his little coward ass ran out of the meeting room even after he heard a question posed to him. So you're not going to get any type of information or defense from him regarding this action. One thing that I will say, America is known for its selective enforcement of its laws, especially when it comes to people of the sun. Laws were made specifically in order to prohibit and inhibit our progress to be full-fledged citizens, both educationally and economically. But again, selective enforcement of laws basically is what caused that situation. And it is now the selective enforcement of this particular law that's targeting 800,000 people. Let me say this, everybody, and that includes Republicans, is not of the same mind on this one. And you have a couple of Republicans that are putting forth legislation to fix this issue. But Mr. Trump has indicated through the used car salesman's daughter, Sarah Huckabee, that they are not looking for just a one-issue fix. So they may be trying to leverage fixing this DACA situation with getting his quote-unquote wall built. And the Democrats are basically going to push back against that. The other thing of note is the state of California has already announced that they are planning on suing the president in federal court as far as having him, I guess, unrescind the rescission he did on President Obama's executive order. Now, funny thing happened on the way to the court. It really depends on which court you decide to make your case in. Now, California, California is going to sue in the Ninth Circuit, which is known as a very progressive circuit. So they may prevail there as far as DACA individuals are concerned. But from the Ninth Circuit, it's going to end up going to the Supreme Court. And that's more than likely where they're going to lose, given the current makeup of the Supreme Court. But knowing California like I do, they are probably going to defy any ruling against them issued by the Supreme Court. So we're basically looking at another situation where there's a constitutional crisis. Donald Trump really knows how to create issues. But the icing on the cake is, as I stated earlier, approximately 4 hours after this news conference or press conference was done, Donald Trump tweeted out that if Congress does not act in the 6 months, that he is going to revisit this situation, which I guess means that he could potentially reinstate DACA. Go figure. Folks, we're in a shitstorm right now. We got a guy that's in office that, number one, is out there for himself. He's more than likely going to get impeached. He's trying to slow down the special prosecutor who is following the money. And when he gets to the end of that money trail, Trump is done. But even with Trump being out of office, the successor, unless they can get Mike Pence for obstruction of justice, Mike Pence will become the president. But then we still have a problem if you knock both of them out, because the next guy up is Paul Ryan, and then after that it's the Senate pro tem, not Mitch McConnell. He's like seventh on line, I believe. But folks, 2018, 2020 are now more important than ever. And all I can say is get out there and vote. Your vote does matter, as you can see from what happened in the last election. It absolutely does matter. And people of the Sun, I don't give a damn what you say. If we had come to the polls in stronger numbers, and don't get me wrong, we went to the polls and at the rate of approximately 90% for the other candidate, who honestly, I wasn't all that hot on, but lesser of two evils, I damn sure wouldn't have picked Donald Trump. But we need to get our numbers out there. We need to get our candidates out there. We need to hold our candidates' feet to the fire. And we need to get rid of a bunch of these people who obviously want nothing more than to cut taxes on the rich, who are their buddies. They want to decimate all social programs that help the people, both the poor and the middle class. And that's the name of that tune. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. If you like the video, just hit the like button, subscribe if you choose to, and share if you think that this video has value.